In a quiet community, a respected pastor was seen as a man of God, a pillar of faith. But behind the pulpit, he carried a secret so dark it would shatter an entire congregation. When his twin stepdaughters were found dead inside the church, the truth unraveled, a web of forbidden affairs, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder. This is the chilling story of Pastor Samuel Price and how his own sins became his downfall. This is true Crimes Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe, because these are the stories that guilty prayed would stay buried. Sunday morning sunlight streamed through the tall stained glass windows, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the church pews. The congregation hadn't yet arrived, but Deacon Harold Benton was already there, his footsteps echoing softly against the wooden floor as he moved to set up hymnals. He paused mid-step, frowning. A faint, sour odor lingered in the air. At first, he dismissed it as something from the alley behind the building, but as he walked toward the pulpit, it grew stronger. Harold glanced toward the locked storage room behind the stage. He tried to shake off the unease, telling himself it was nothing, but the smell followed him into his thoughts like an unwelcome whisper. Martha James, the church custodian, came in carrying a mop and bucket. She stopped in her tracks when she caught the same scent. "Something's dead in here," she muttered, setting the mop aside. Harold's face tightened. "We'll check the storage," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Samuel Price appeared from the hallway, his white clerical collar perfectly in place, Bible tucked under one arm, a practiced smile on his face. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone warm but his eyes sharp. Harold explained about the smell, but Samuel waved it off. "The exterminator sprayed for pests last week. Fumigation odor lingers," he said smoothly. "Best not to go in there until it's clear." He turned and walked away, his shoes clicking evenly on the tile. Martha and Harold exchanged a look. Later that morning, Harold couldn't shake the feeling. During the coffee break between Sunday school and service, he slipped back to the pulpit area, Martha at his side. They found the storage room door locked tight. Harold tried the handle again, harder this time. The metal rattled but held firm. "We've got spare keys in the office," Martha said. The spare key didn't fit. Someone had changed the lock. That was enough to turn Harold's unease into suspicion. By late afternoon, when Samuel left to visit a sick parishioner, Harold called the custodian back. Together, they used a crowbar to pry the latch. The moment the door swung open, a wall of stench rolled out, thick and suffocating. Martha gagged, pressing her sleeve to her nose. Harold's eyes widened as he stepped inside, his shoes crunching on the scattered debris of the storage. Behind two stacks of unused Bibles lay two large black plastic bags, duct tape wound tight around them. The shapes inside were unmistakably human. Martha stumbled back, her hand trembling as she fumbled for her phone to dial 911. Within minutes, the church was swarming with police, the air outside buzzing with murmurs from onlookers who'd gathered, drawn by the flashing lights. Detective Daniel Whitmore stepped inside, ducking under the yellow tape. He took one look at the scene and signaled for the crime scene unit. "Clear the sanctuary," he ordered. Even hardened officers flinched at what they saw. Two young black women, identical in face and form, their skin pale and still, faint bruises circling their necks like ghostly necklaces. Their clothes were tidy, but their hair was slightly disheveled, as if they'd been caught off guard. Detective Whitmore glanced at Officer Lila Monroe. "Get their names," he said quietly. "We need next of kin." In the fellowship hall, Samuel sat in a folding chair, hands folded, brows knit in apparent confusion. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice calm but tinged with disbelief. "Who would do such a thing?" He rose when told the bodies were his stepdaughters, Arielle and Alina Johnson. He staggered slightly, placing a hand to his forehead. No, that can't be." His voice cracked at the edges, but his eyes, Lila noticed, were dry. Outside, word spread like wildfire. Members of the congregation wept openly. Others stood frozen, shaking their heads. Pastor Price loved those girls, someone whispered. He raised them like his own. But evil often wears the mask of love, and sometimes the hands that bless are the same hands that kill. Forensics began their work, photographing every inch of the storage room. Detectives whispered among themselves, noting that the lock had been changed recently, the latch showing fresh pry marks. In the corner, a half-empty bottle of cleaning solution sat beside a roll of unused garbage bags identical to the ones holding the bodies. When Whitmore approached Samuel for initial questioning, the pastor's demeanor was calm, almost too calm. "I've been with the church all day," he said. "Ask anyone." His words were steady, but there was something in his tone, a rehearsed cadence that set Whitmore's instincts humming. The sanctuary was quiet now, the scent of incense unable to mask the metallic tang in the air. Samuel glanced toward the pulpit, then back at the detectives, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Somewhere behind his calm, behind the holy image he'd spent decades cultivating, lay a truth he prayed no one would ever dig deep enough to find. But secrets have a way of rising, and the grave he thought he'd hidden inside his own house of God was already starting to speak. By Monday morning, the church parking lot was still lined with yellow tape, and the front entrance stood locked under the watch of an officer leaning against his patrol car. Reporters had gathered in clusters, their cameras trained on the modest brick building that had once been a symbol of comfort for the neighborhood. Now, it was a crime scene. Inside, Detective Whitmore sat across from Samuel Price in the fellowship hall, a notebook in front of him. The pastor's hands were folded on the table, his wedding band glinting in the fluorescent light. "When was the last time you saw Arielle and Alina?" Whitmore asked. Samuel's eyes lowered. "Saturday evening. They stopped by my office here at the church. Said they were going to meet friends." His tone was smooth, but Whitmore had interviewed enough people to know when a story was too neat. "Anyone else here that night?" Whitmore pressed. "No," Samuel said, then corrected himself. "Actually, Ruth came by to bring me dinner. She stayed about 10 minutes, then left." Whitmore wrote this down without comment. In another room, Officer Lila Monroe was speaking with Ruth Price. Her eyes were red, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup of water. "I can't believe this," Ruth kept saying. "They were my girls, my babies." She swore she hadn't seen them since Friday. When Lila asked if Samuel had been home Saturday night, Ruth hesitated for a fraction of a second before saying yes, but her voice lacked conviction. Outside, church members lingered near the sidewalk, trying to reconcile their image of Samuel with the horror that had unfolded inside. "He baptized my son," Tanya Lewis told a reporter, her voice shaking. "I just can't see him doing something like this." The thing about monsters is they rarely look like monsters until the mask slips. Back at the precinct, the autopsy reports were beginning to take shape. No signs of sexual assault, but the cause of death was clear: strangulation. The bruising patterns were consistent, the timing almost identical for both sisters. Lila studied the photographs, her jaw tight. "This wasn't random," she said to Whitmore. "Whoever did this took their time." "This was personal," Whitmore agreed. "And he had access," he added. "Those girls trusted him enough to be here alone with him." That night, Samuel stood at his kitchen sink, washing dishes as if the world wasn't crumbling around him. Ruth sat at the table, staring into her tea. "The police, they asked if you'd been alone with them," she said softly. Samuel didn't turn. "People talk," he replied. "They're hurting. They want someone to blame." Ruth's voice trembled. "But you were here, right? Saturday?" He set down the plate slowly, wiped his hands, and turned to her with the same calm expression he wore in the pulpit. "I was here, Ruth. You have to trust me." Across town, Whitmore and Lila revisited the church. Alone in the storage room, Whitmore ran his flashlight over the walls, noting a faint smear near the doorframe. He called in the techs to swab it. They also found a small broken chain on the floor, a piece of jewelry perhaps, snapped in a struggle. "Get this bagged," Whitmore said. Outside, rain began to fall, and Whitmore stood under the overhang, watching the water pool near the steps. "You think he's our guy?" Lila asked. "I think he's too calm for a man who just lost 2 daughters," Whitmore replied. I've seen grief. This isn't it. That night, Samuel opened the church's back door under the cover of darkness. He stepped into the storage room, the stench almost gone thanks to the bleach he'd poured hours earlier. He began moving boxes, rearranging the space as if restoring order could erase what had happened. He didn't notice the faint residue of duct tape adhesive still clinging to the floor, or the small scuff marks from shoes that would later match Arielle's and Alina's. He was thinking about the rain. He'd checked the forecast twice that day, storms coming later in the week. He'd been waiting for that, planning to move the bodies then, to burn them in a secluded fire pit the church had used for retreats, scattering the ashes where no one would ever find them. But fate had moved faster than his plans. Now, the game had shifted to control. He would cry when people expected him to cry. He would speak of forgiveness and prayer. And he would pray, he would pray that no one dug deeper than the surface.
If you're enjoying this video, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. Share and like this video. It's free and won't cost anything, but it helps and encourages us to grow and do more. Thank you for your kindness, and back to the video.
In the coming days, that cry would grow louder until even the faithful could no longer pretend they didn't hear it. By Tuesday morning, the story had spread beyond the neighborhood, making headlines on local TV and climbing the trending list online. Photos of Arielle and Alina, bright smiles frozen in better times, flashed across screens alongside footage of Samuel shaking hands with community leaders, dedicating a new wing of the church, leading choir prayer. The contrast was jarring. At the precinct, Whitmore went over security footage from the church's exterior cameras. Most showed nothing but the empty parking lot at night, the occasional car passing by. But one clip caught his attention. Late Saturday evening, two female figures approaching the side entrance, Samuel stepping out to unlock the door for them. The timestamp matched his claim that they'd visited. He'd failed to mention letting them inside. Whitmore called Lila over. That's them. And that's him letting them in after hours. He's already lied once. Lila nodded grimly. He's not slipping up by accident. He thinks we can't touch him. That afternoon, they brought Samuel back in. The pastor sat across from Whitmore in the small interview room, his posture perfect, his hands clasped loosely. Whitmore slid a still image from the footage across the table. Explain this, he said. Samuel studied the photo, then looked up with a faint smile. They often came by to talk. They were troubled girls. I was counseling them. After hours? Behind a locked door? Samuel's smile faded slightly. Privacy matters when someone's unburdening their soul. Lila leaned forward. You changed the lock on the storage room. Why? The lock was old. I replaced it to keep the place secure, Samuel replied without missing a beat. That evening, Ruth visited Tanya Lewis, her friend from the choir. Over steaming mugs of coffee, Ruth confessed she didn't know what to believe. Sam says the police are just fishing, Ruth said, her eyes searching Tanya's face. But they keep coming back, and her voice trailed off. Tanya hesitated, then spoke. Ruth, I'm not saying I believe it, but I've seen the way he looks at the girls, especially Alina. It's not how a stepfather should look. Ruth's breath caught. She forced a laugh, but her hand trembled as she set down her cup. The next morning, Whitmore received the lab results from the storage room swabs. The faint smear on the doorframe tested positive for human blood. The broken chain on the floor had a small locket attached. Inside was a tiny photo of Arielle and Alina, taken when they were 12. Whitmore called Lila into his office. He didn't even bother to get rid of it, he said. Either he's arrogant or he thinks he's untouchable. Lila glanced at the caseboard where Samuel's photo sat at the center. Maybe he's both. At church that night, Samuel held a special vigil for the twins, the sanctuary packed with mourners. His voice trembled in all the right places, his hands outstretched as he prayed for justice. Cameras clicked, and a few reporters even praised his composure. But in the back row, Whitmore watched in silence. The performance was flawless, yet the pastor never once looked at the pew where the twins used to sit. That kind of omission isn't an accident, it's a crack, and cracks only get bigger. Later, as Samuel walked to his car, Whitmore approached. "We'll be speaking again soon," he said. Samuel smiled faintly. "Any time, detective. I have nothing to hide." But his eyes flickered toward the rain-darkened sky, calculating, as if still measuring the days until the weather could wash his sins away. He didn't yet realize the tide was already coming for him, and it wasn't rain, it was truth. Thursday began with a restless gray sky, the kind that seemed to press low over the city, heavy with the promise of rain. Samuel sat in his office at the church, staring at an open Bible but reading nothing. Outside his window, parishioners bustled past, dropping off food and flowers in honor of the twins. Every gesture of kindness was another weight on his shoulders, though he wore his grief mask so well that most couldn't see it. But Detective Whitmore could. That morning, Whitmore and Lila returned to the church with a warrant. Samuel greeted them with a calm smile, but his knuckles tightened on the doorframe. "Of course, detectives. Search wherever you need," he said, his voice smooth as oil. The warrant allowed them into his office and private storage areas. While Lila rifled through desk drawers, Whitmore studied the bookshelves, his eyes settling on a weathered ledger tucked between hymnals. Inside were handwritten schedules, sermons, meetings, and personal notes. Saturday's page was mostly blank except for 2 words scribbled in the margin: storm prep. "You planning for a hurricane?" Whitmore asked, holding up the book. Samuel's jaw flexed. "We have roof leaks. I was going to patch them before the storms hit." It was plausible, but Whitmore knew better. A search of the church van uncovered a box of industrial garbage bags, a gas can, and heavy-duty gloves in the rear compartment. The gas can was nearly full. Lila photographed everything before tagging it for evidence. Back at the station, Whitmore laid it out for him in the interview room. "Here's what I think happened," Whitmore began, his tone steady. "You lured Arielle and Alina here Saturday night. You drugged them, then strangled them. You stored their bodies until the storm, when you planned to burn them and scatter the ashes." Samuel's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. "We have your changed lock, your supply of identical bags, the locket from the scene, and the security footage," Whitmore continued. "You want to tell me where I'm wrong?" Samuel leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "Detective, your imagination is creative. But I am a man of God. Those girls were like my own daughters." "Like your daughters," Whitmore repeated, letting the words hang. "Yet people have noticed the way you looked at them, especially Alina." A flicker passed over Samuel's face, annoyance quickly buried. Meanwhile, Ruth sat in her living room, clutching a framed photo of her daughters. Tanya was beside her, speaking gently but firmly. "You have to be honest with yourself, Ruth. If he could hide this from you, what else could he hide?" Ruth shook her head, tears brimming. No, I would know." But deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast. That evening, Whitmore received a call from the lab. Trace amounts of a sedative were found in the twin systems, matching an unmarked bottle of pills found in Samuel's desk, ground to powder. Combined with the strangulation marks, it painted a chilling picture. Samuel had subdued them before killing them, minimizing the struggle. Control was his aim from beginning to end. The next day, Samuel stood at the pulpit, delivering what he called a message of perseverance. He spoke of trials, of enemies, of false accusations meant to tear down the righteous. The congregation nodded, some even clapped. Watching from the back, Lila could almost admire the performance. But when his gaze swept across the room, it never lingered on the empty seats where Arielle and Alina should have been. That night, Whitmore laid the case file open on his desk, every photo and report in place. The weight of it was heavy, but not as heavy as the truth it carried, that the man who preached salvation had turned the sanctuary into a tomb. He knew the next step was to break Samuel's facade entirely, to corner him with the one thing he couldn't control, the truth of his own plan. And Samuel's map was nearly complete in Whitmore's mind. All that remained was to confront him with it and watch the mask shatter. Friday morning, rain fell in a steady curtain over the city, pooling in the gutters and streaking down the church's stained glass windows like tears. The streets were slick and gray, and the air carried that sharp scent of a storm that had been building for days. Detective Whitmore moved with deliberate calm as he entered the precinct's interview room, a thick case file under one arm, a sealed plastic evidence bag in his hand. Pastor Samuel Price sat at the metal table, his Bible closed in front of him, fingers resting lightly on its cover as if the weight of the book could shield him from what was coming. His collar was still perfectly straight, but there was a faint tightness in his shoulders that Whitmore hadn't seen before. Without a word, Whitmore dropped the evidence bag on the table between them. Inside was the ledger page with storm prep scrawled in Samuel's handwriting, alongside high-resolution photos of the gas can, gloves, and rolls of industrial garbage bags found in the church van. "This," Whitmore began, his voice steady but edged with steel, "isn't for patching a church roof. This is a disposal kit. This is what you were going to use to get rid of Arielle and Alina." Samuel's eyes flickered briefly, the calm mask slipping for a fraction of a second before settling back into place. "I have no idea what you're implying," he said, his voice smooth but quieter than before. Whitmore leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "You were waiting for weather like this. Late at night, under cover of rain, you'd take them out in separate trips so nobody would see you. You'd burn them in that fire pit at the retreat grounds, the same one you've used for years to burn old church furniture, then scatter what was left. You thought no one would ever know. But you didn't count on the smell getting out. You didn't count on Deacon Benton and Martha James opening that door." Samuel's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck rigid. "You don't have proof I killed them," he said finally, but there was less conviction in the words than there had been days before. Whitmore slid another set of photographs across the table, close-up shots of the broken locket chain found on the storage room floor, the locket itself with the twins' childhood photo inside, the bruising patterns on their necks matching the exact length and weave of Samuel's pastoral stole. "We have proof you were the last person to see them alive. Proof you lied about where you were that night. Proof you had the means, the opportunity, and the most desperate motive of all, to silence them before they told your wife, your congregation, and your entire community about the relationship you had with them." The air in the room thickened, the hum of the overhead light the only sound between them for several long seconds. Samuel's lips parted, but whatever words he might have spoken died before they could leave his mouth. Silence can be a shield, but in that moment, it was also a confession in disguise. Outside the interview room, Ruth sat in a waiting area, her coat draped over her knees, her hands gripping a framed photograph so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She had heard enough through the thin walls, snippets of Whitmore's voice, the cold clinical words that turned her stomach. Officer Lila Monroe sat beside her, offering quiet comfort, but Ruth's gaze stayed fixed on the closed door. When Whitmore stepped out minutes later, she looked up at him, eyes glassy with a mix of grief and disbelief. "It's true, isn't it?" she whispered. He didn't answer directly. "We'll be taking him in today," he said softly. Ruth's lips trembled, but she nodded once, as if forcing herself to accept the weight of what she'd already known deep down. By evening, a crowd had gathered outside the church as unmarked cars pulled up to the side entrance. News cameras jostled for position, their lenses trained on the door. When Samuel emerged in handcuffs, flanked by officers, the rain fell harder, plastering his hair to his head. The collar was gone. His eyes stayed forward, his mouth set in a thin line. No one in the crowd spoke at first, the only sounds the clicking of camera shutters and the low growl of thunder. Tanya Lewis stood near the front, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched an umbrella she'd forgotten to open. "He fooled all of us," she murmured to no one in particular. "Every single one of us." The trial began months later, the courtroom packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and members of the congregation still wrestling with betrayal. The prosecution built their case methodically, starting with the security footage, the changed locks, the sedatives, and the twin systems, and ending with the meticulous outline of Samuel's storm night disposal plan. Whitmore took the stand, his testimony a calm but devastating dismantling of Samuel's public image. The defense tried to paint Samuel as a victim of circumstantial evidence and gossip, but the facts spoke louder than sermons. The twins' mother, Ruth, testified only once. She sat straight in the witness chair, her hands folded in her lap. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held the kind of cold clarity that comes when the final illusion shatters. "I believed him more than I believed my own instincts," she said. "That was my sin, and my daughters paid for it." The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of pens against notepads. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a unanimous guilty verdict on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Samuel Price showed no visible reaction as the sentence was read: life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the back row, a few church members wept quietly, while others stared at the man they had once defended, now stripped of his holy armor. If you followed this story to the end, we want to hear from you. Do you believe justice was truly served? Comment your thoughts below, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for weekly true crime episodes.